Good afternoon and welcome to Deering Live on this wonderful Thursday. It's not Thursday, it's Wednesday afternoon, the
Wednesday.
earlier
Hey,
time.
yeah,
Sorry,
that.
Dave. I think just like you, I'm a little bit jet lagged, and so I'm not quite with the world yet. But we've both been traveling, not together, but we have been traveling, have we not?
We have.
Yes,
I
we
just
have.
landed in South America today. So
Nice. I just landed back in San Diego, coming from my home country after a nice visit to the U.S. Embassy. That was a fun time.
That's another
That's
story.
That's a whole different story. But it was good. It was good. All right. So before we get in today, this is going to be a fun episode. And I imagine a very interesting episode as well. I can't wait to get into it. But before we do, real quick, if you are in the US and you are looking to pick up a banjo this time of year, maybe for yourself or for your loved one for Christmas or for the holiday season, our Good Time 2 banjos are currently still available as part of our Black Friday extended sale. You can pick up the Good Time Open Back for $499 and the Good Time 2 for $719 from participating dealers in the US through Sunday. So do take advantage of that. Pretty good deal, I think. And most US dealers are taking part in that. So, Dave, happy with that?
Yeah, price busters.
Price busters, that's right. Good, made in America quality. That's what we like. All right, so our guest today is an award-winning musician and scholar. He is a recipient of the very prestigious Steve Martin Banjo Prize, which, if you missed it, we hosted a couple of weeks ago. But I believe Jake won just a number of years ago now. And he's a two-time winner of the Appalachian String Band Music Festival, otherwise known as Clifftop. He's a specialist in the early folk music of Black Americans, and his latest record, The New Faith, was released on September 23rd of this year as part of the Smithsonian Folkways Recording African American Legacy series. There's someone we know quite well called Rhiannon Giddens, and she put out a quote on our guest today that says, "On top of being wildly intelligent and knowledgeable, he's also a killer musician," and that's an incredible combo. And having kind of hung with him just for 20 minutes or so before the show and we watched him play, he plays magnificently, sounds fantastic. So I think there's probably only one way to get on with the show, and that's to welcome our guest, Mr. Jake Blount. Bring him in. Here he is. Hey, Jake.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And where are you in the world today?
I am in Providence, Rhode Island, home at last.
And that's where you're from, right?
I'm originally from Washington, D.C., but I live in Providence these days.
Very cool. Very
It's a nice place there.
I've never been.
Never
Come
been.
visit.
I recommend it in the summertime.
Yes, definitely a good seasonal destination. Come to Newport.
Yeah, the
of
Newport
course,
Folk
yeah.
Fest. It's right up. It's very close by.
That is very close by. Hey, do you play there? I think you have, right? I read that you
I have
played there
twice,
a couple times. Yeah. How was that experience being kind of in your home area?
I mean, it was really cool to play. I've been hearing about Newport for years. You know, that was a goal for me. So certainly a little bit geeked out and nervous and excited every time I get to do something with those folks. They're awesome and they treat you really well.
Yeah, Dave, you went a couple times, right? With
Yeah, we've been there a couple times with Deering, and it's a fantastic festival. You know, the whole thing, the location, the artists, it's done very well.
Very cool. All right, well, we've got lots of things to talk about. Before we do, you want to kick things off with a little tune? And as is tradition for Deering Live, what are you going to play for us?
I'm going to play a tune called Pretty Little Shoes that I think originally came from a guy named Ward Jarvis. But I learned it from a recording of a dear friend and teacher of mine named Judy Hyman from Ithaca, New York, and then played it for her years later, and she went, "I don't know that tune." So take that as you will. I've done my thing to it.
Love it.
All right, that was beautiful. That was really really nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. What kind of struck me there is, the tune's a simple little short, melody that kind of goes around, but it's just really hypnotic almost, and the way you're playing it, it's just really you have a lot of sensitivity, and you're using dynamics, and it feels musical. Where how did you get that into your playing? Because a lot of times banjo players have a tendency to be a little heavy-handed or go too fast or too loud.
Not that I am immune to those tendencies, but I think have spent most of my banjo career playing in banjo fiddle duo settings, and I've noticed over the past like year and a half when I've been touring with the whole string band a lot of the time that touring with the whole band forces you to be really heavy-handed, and I think the same could be said for playing often in jams that include all of the instruments as opposed to just a few. When I'm playing with especially a guitar player, if I'm not careful, the banjo just gets swallowed by the guitar, and I have to hit it really hard. And then every time I come home, there's this process of like relearning where I think my banjo actually sounds the best, of really paying close attention to the resonances and to the way it sounds. And even, when I have a microphone like this a little ways away, really thinking about what part of the string I'm playing on, that kind of thing. It's just taken playing in a lot of different settings, I think, and paying attention to how the really skillful fiddlers I've had the pleasure of playing with have put their own dynamics and their own sort of rhythmic interpretation onto the tune, and finding that going into my own playing, kind of whether I invite it there or not.
Yeah. Did you play fiddle before you played banjo?
No, I played electric guitar first, but I was terrible at it. And then I picked up banjo. That was my first like folk instrument.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I could see how playing the fiddle, especially if they're fiddle tunes, really can get you into the song a little bit deeper on a certain way, especially because the fiddle has, you can play long tones, and you can try to, I guess, learn to emulate that by letting the banjo ring a little bit more rather than.
Absolutely. I don't think I would sound. I think both of them each other within
Yeah,
me. I don't
yeah.
think that my fiddle playing would sound like it does if I wasn't a banjo player first,
Hmm.
and I don't think that my banjo playing would sound like it does if I wasn't also a fiddle player.
Yeah. Have you been able to bring, I totally agree. That banjo players can get heavy-handed because they're often playing in jams. They come up learning playing in jams, or they're playing in full, and they're just trying to get heard, and you really pound it out. But have you been able to work with like your stage setup to be able to play with a light touch with the full band, where you can, make the banjo sound the best, like where you think it sounds good, and then get it just amplified, when you're playing.
Yeah, I think have learned even just in recent months is that I need to not be afraid to use the monitor with the
Hmm.
banjo. Where my usual impulse is that I need my voice back at me from the monitor, but otherwise, instrument wise, I'm used to being able to hear what I need. But because of the way banjos are built, as you know, they project the sound forward,
Right,
and
right.
you don't necessarily get a whole lot if you're standing up. And for me, that's like a couple
Mm.
feet between my
Yeah,
head and the instrument. So, um, I have had to just be bold with that, but I just think where I'm landing as a player these days is that my banjo and my banjo playing don't shine their best in a band
right.
setting. And I'm doing a few projects in the spring that are going to be smaller ensembles and more intimate, and I'm really excited for that because I think it actually has been hard to stay in touch with the banjo with so much other sound going on. And the richness of the tone there can get swallowed really easily in a big band situation.
Right. Yeah, I think being an acoustic musician, I know myself, being a little bit afraid of using the monitor because you like to hear the acoustic sound, and it's a
Yep.
different attack when you hear it, coming through a speaker. But I think that would allow you to play with that light touch.
Yeah.
Well, your new record, I want to talk about that, the New Faith. It's a fantastic recording, and it's the whole idea of it is really cool. It's for everybody. I'm going to try to explain it, and then you can kind of correct me where I screw up. But for those, it's a fiction. It's songs, it's tunes, but it's based upon a fictional story about in a post kind of apocalyptic climate crisis world um, where there's black refugees go um, find an island off the coast of Maine, and then they start a religious ceremony playing these old string band tunes, but with modern aesthetics coming in. But that kind of outlines it, and then why don't you fill in the gaps how I missed?
Yeah, I mean the way I always explained it, the elevator pitch is that it's an Afrofuturist record depicting what black folk music might sound like in the era after climate change.
Mhm.
So when all of the increasingly terrifying cycles of ecological damage that we are witnessing and perpetuating today spiral fully out of our control, society changes, people are living in very different ways, they have to migrate to find food, arable land, clean water, etc. Um, the idea was that some of these traditions would probably survive, but also that the people of the future would have heard everything that we have heard today, and that would in some way still come through in the music that they were making. And the project there was to kind of envision how culture and music might progress even as technology regresses, right? These people in my
Mhm.
head don't have access to like digital processing,
Right,
and they
right.
don't even have consistent electricity. So it became, what does like hip hop inflected music sound like, or what do those production techniques sound like when applied to acoustic
Right,
instruments?
yeah.
Which was a fun challenge.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you could definitely see a book coming out of this whole sort of idea. It's a really cool. It's a really cool idea, and I do have one question. Are they only? Why is it only string band music? Because there's a number of string band music mixed with like hip hop. You
Well,
know,
yeah, I mean, I would consider the new record to be actually mostly spirituals.
yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah.
And that the string band stuff is the instrumentation that I use because it's the instrumentation that I'm good at.
Right. Right.
So I threw some electric guitar on there. I got a good blues guitarist to sit in for a song. Like there's other stuff going on, but
Sure.
my main tools are the banjo and the fiddle. So those wound up being the bedrock of the sound. And I think in future iterations that might be different, but it also might not. One of the fun things about that project was getting to really twist the timetable there and be working with this banjo tune from 1687, and have it you know sit really nicely with rap over it, even though those things didn't coexist prior to now. The way that those things can fit together is really exciting to me. So I always like to see what I can mash together of my culture's leavings from across time.
Yeah, it really works well. It's sometimes fusion sort of things like this can kind of go awry. Really, works, and I brought this up with a lot of because we have a lot of traditional musicians on here. And about pushing traditional music forward, and I love how you've said this. I think it's a field recording from the future, um, and um, how do you feel about trying to what about trying to push keep pushing not just trying to reenact an old recording and just playing a bunch of string band tunes note for note of like an old recording. How do you feel? What's your take on that sort of thing when playing traditional music?
Yeah, I mean, having done both things to an extent, I mean, I think um, you wind up in this weird situation with a lot of the traditional folk crowd where like Spider Tales, my first album, is for 99% of the world an extremely archaic trad album.
Right.
And for people within the trad bubble, it feels very progressive in a lot of ways. And some parts of it definitely are, but there are some crusty old time tunes on that record.
Yeah.
I find meaning in doing both things. Kind of, I think the reason why I didn't wind up making another old time record was one, because Folkways approached me about this one like a couple months after Spider Tales had come out, and I was like, I don't have the repertoire built up yet. Like, it took me 3 years to put together the songs that went on Spider Tales. And not that I couldn't do it faster if I had focus and time, but I didn't have time. And because it was the pandemic, I couldn't actually get a band together. I couldn't rely on being able to record with other people. So it felt like, how am I going to make a record of community music when I can't be in community with people? That doesn't feel like what the moment is calling for. So I sat down and kind of thought, what can I do with only my hands, or maybe like a couple other people who I can work with remotely, that will speak to where we are right now. And also, I think, to deliberately move a little bit farther from the traditional stuff than I had, because I think when Spider Tales came out, people definitely stuck me in this box of like black string band music historian, and I certainly have read a lot about it and I'm happy to share it, but I'm also like not a trained historian. Like, there are people who have dedicated whole careers to that, and I do have my scholarly focus, but it's in a different place. So for me, this felt like a more, okay, I need to bring more of myself to the table because I don't feel like people really got it last time. And I think maybe that's like the process across many albums of being a professional musician, that you're kind of trying to slowly guide people to understanding who you are and what you can do.
Yeah, definitely, I can feel that. Yeah, and you kind of went into some of this. I was curious about the recording process because this was a a pandemic era, record that you made. Did you do that in a lot of it in the home studio, or did you go to because and a lot of it is you, playing different instruments as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, I did almost all of it at home. I had one day in a studio as part of the process where I did some of the vocal tracks for some of the more like stripped down and sensitive pieces. Um, but for the most part, a lot of it actually was in this room. Although I have actually like built this part of the studio situation over like the past week. It was not this well set up when I made the record in here, but yeah, I had never done anything like that before. I'd never really been that into like the software, the gear, or whatever that you
Hmm.
need to do that kind of thing. And I don't think I'm ever gonna go back to making an entire album in the studio. There are some things that I can't do that well in here because they rely on the room being good. Like I don't think I
Right.
would optionally record like a fiddle piece in here because the
Hmm.
ceiling is low and the fiddle doesn't sound that good.
Right.
But certainly there are many things that I'm happy to do at home now, and I don't know that I'm ever going to change that.
It really gives you the relaxation to work on things how you want it, not on a time crunch. Oh, this is going to cost me X, Y, so much money.
Exactly. I mean, I for some of these songs, especially like the ones with guitar solos and stuff, I was so mean to myself about the guitar solos. Both on The New Faith and on The Man Was Burning, which was released before but actually recorded after. Um, and that comes from many years of being a bad guitar player and therefore being, if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it right. um but I mean, I must have recorded that solo like 50 times, maybe even more, and just done it in like many, just tried out a ton of different approaches, tried to nail them down as best I could. um Especially when it comes to playing the fiddle on records, there's so much trouble to be found in trying to like discern what microphone to use to record a fiddle and where to put it and all of those things. And I think in a studio you have the benefit of a professional engineer who will make more educated choices, but you also kind of have to trust them to have the same sound goal that
Right.
you do, or the knowledge to know how to get it. And a lot of guys, that you go in and work in a regular studio, they don't record banjos and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure, banjo players among you in the audience who've recorded albums before will know the struggle of like going into the studio and having the engineer like slap a compressor on the banjo and it just kills your tone right away. And they don't know better. They're used to putting a compressor on everything. So it's a really nice thing to have the control to be really tweaky about it, to learn what I like, because after making that album, I churned out a single in 2 days, basically did a rough mix myself, and then finished it with an engineer in one day.
Yeah.
And I never could have done that before. I think going through all the steps makes you so much more informed about the choices that you have, and how to get the sounds that you want. I think I was talking to my guitarist on the last tour, and I said microphones are also instruments, and I think music would sound so much better if more musicians learned how to play them.
How'd you also get out of because there's the rabbit hole of when you're alone and you have infinite amount of time and takes, where you end up making like that guitar solo. You get, I bet there's multiple takes that a non-musician friend would come and be like, they sound the same. Where you're not, where you're, but you hear it, but you don't, aren't just like spinning your wheels though. You aren't just kind of almost going crazy about things that aren't really that important. How to like cut it and be like, all right, let's go. Like this is it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, like you can get limitlessly detailed when there's no
Right.
one else holding you accountable. So that's definitely an easy trap to fall into, and I definitely did it a lot of times. What I would say is recording yourself that much makes you deeply aware of the shortcomings in your own musicianship, and I think that's why a lot of musicians hate recording themselves, because it makes you laser focused on all the things that you're doing wrong. And I think I feel that a lot of times, but I also have come to embrace recordings as this is a snapshot of where I am right now.
Right.
And I need to make this as good as I possibly can with the skills and the equipment at my disposal right now. And there will come a day for me to do a better job, and it's going to have to be on another day. Some of it did just involve a huge amount of time. Like, I spent a lot of time working on that record for sure. And that meant the first song that we started was The Downward Road, and that was the last song that we finished because I wasn't getting the vocals quite where I want them. I'm still not totally satisfied with how they came out in the end. There are things that are happening there that I don't like, but I accept those as my limitations right now. I'm going to practice a ton, so when I go and record the next album, I can sing that right. When I go out on the stage and play it, I can sing it right. I think it can all be productive rather than, a feedback loop in your own head if you try to keep a good mindset about it.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to look at it, as a snapshot of time, and
Yeah.
and don't beat yourself up just because, well, I'll do a better job, next time.
Exactly.
You mentioned The Downward Road. Are there two banjo tracks on that record? There's a steel string banjo and then a nylon string banjo.
I think so.
That-
I definitely
you have-
recorded both.
Okay, but there's a constant rhythmic banjo where you're strumming kind of up and down there.
The banjo
Right?
ukulele. Yes.
Okay, that's what it was, the banjo uke. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good sound. It gives it a nice groove, and then mixing it in that the older sound banjo. Was it a nylon string or was it just a different?
So yeah, I have it's in here somewhere, but I don't have it out right now. I have a fretless nylon string banjo from Rhiannon Banjos. That's a 12-inch Dobson pot, so it has a tone ring in it. And a shallower pot than it's not a minstrel banjo, but it kind of does some of the same stuff. Yeah, I think it sounds pretty good on that cut. Ideally, I think would have used a gourd banjo for that because of what the piece is, right? The banjo part from that is cribbed from this 1687 banjo tune called Angola that Hans Sloane with a guy named Mr. Baptiste collected from enslaved Africans in Jamaica way back then. So I think had I owned a gourd banjo, which I hope to get one soon, had I owned a gourd banjo, I would have used that, but it was the best thing that I had at the time, and I like the way that banjo sounds. I think it did a really good job there.
It sounds good, and it's cool how you took that banjo piece from that. There's written out notation because it's not an old recording back then.
Mm-hmm.
It's written out by this Hans Sloane, and who else was involved in that?
Hans Sloane is the guy who published it. It's in his book of memoirs. But I don't know if y'all read Well of Souls yet, Christina Gagne's new book.
No.
It's the banjo book that's been needing to be written. It's incredible. And she dug very deeply into that. So I guess Hans Sloane saw the music taking place, wanted to write it down, but wasn't good enough at transcribing music to accurately take down what was happening. And there was an enslaved African musician there named Mr. Baptiste who was. So Mr. Baptiste actually transcribed the sheet music, and then Hans Sloane published it under his own name, of course. But he mentions Mr. Baptiste in the narrative surrounding it.
How many tunes are in that publication?
I think there are only 3. There's Angola, Papa, and Coromanti. And Coromanti is kind of 3 different pieces of music. It's kind of hard to imagine them fitting together into one. So I feel that there are probably 5, but they're listed as 3.
And how did you find out about this publication, and where did you get access to it?
I first heard about it from Greg Adams, who is an incredible banjo player and historian who works at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, one of the contributors to Banjo Roots and Branches, if anyone has read that book. He knows everything about the banjo. I mean, he and Christina are the codex. It's crazy. And we taught an early banjo class together at Midwest Banjo Camp years ago, and he just like pulled up this website, and I was like, what is this? This is wild. And he taught us a section of a different tune from it, that has a little bit more melody going on. I'm always really drawn the simple epic sounding thing, and that's what Angola is. So I use that actually all over the album. I used it as kind of a motif that resurfaces as the thing goes on.
Another thing that was cool that I found out from watching another video about this album was the that rhythm on Once There Was No Sun from the ring shout tradition.
Yes.
And I hadn't known about that, but it was interesting because the rhythm is the same clave that's I'm from New Orleans, and it's the same
Oh,
clave
yeah.
as New Orleans street beat, which comes from the Mardi Gras Indians, which comes from Caribbean music, and but it's very interesting to see it's the exact same thing.
Oh, totally. Yeah, you see that rhythm happening like everywhere, Caribbean onto the borders here.
Yeah.
And it didn't make it inland, maybe because drums were illegal for black people to own in the United States early on. But absolutely. There's a strong kinship there.
Can you demonstrate what this rhythm is for everybody, just so they can?
So, for people who are not familiar, the ring shout is this Gullah Geechee musical tradition. The Gullah Geechee are a people that originate in, they have since spread, from the Sea Islands in South Carolina and Georgia. They're the descendants of African people who were brought there to work on rice plantations because there were expert rice farmers amongst the Africans being sold out this way. And because their population on those islands was proportionately far more black than it was on the mainland, there were many more black people for each white person who was there. Some of the really restrictive laws about music and dance and stuff did not get as strictly enforced, because you could only push them so far before you had to worry about an uprising. So, whereas the mainland approach, I would say, was maybe a little bit more staid in the religious ceremony, and percussion, as I said, was not permitted because it was believed that it could be used as a signal device in a slave uprising, which at times it was. That was a well-founded fear, but the solution to slave uprisings is to free your slaves. But whatever. The Gullah Geechee people retained a lot of things from Africa that the rest of us lost. And some of that comes through in the song, some of it comes through in the dance. The ring shout is this thing that is really interesting because most of us would describe it as a dance, but culturally it is very specifically not a dance. Basically what happens is there's this rhythm that we've been talking about that will come from people clapping. So there's always people doing... some combination of things. One of the things that I love about those recordings is that there are a ton of different clap rhythms that all work together. And I did that all over this album, like different stereo clap tracks that interact with each other. It's so cool. And then there will be a guy with a broomstick banging on the floor, bop, 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 or bop, 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 bop. So there's a really strong rhythmic thing that's happening, and people kind of shuffle in a circle, and I can't demonstrate because I won't fit all in the frame. This is a small studio space. But the idea at the time was that if you don't lift your feet off the floor and you don't cross your feet, it isn't dancing. So it's this non-dance where you kind of shuffle your feet like this and go around in a ring. And that's what the ring shout is. So there are a number of wonderful songs that go along with that tradition, several of which I used on this record, and one of which I actually used on Spider Tales. So,
well, would you like to play another tune? What kind of in the midway point-ish?
Yeah. All right. I'm going to play a version of Roustabout from Dink Roberts of Haw River, North Carolina.
And what tuning are you going to?
I'm just doing standard G right now, but my banjo's been through some pretty drastic weather changes in the past few days, so it's the goat skin is feeling disagreeable today. All right.
Yeah. Fantastic. And you played that on your album Spider Tales, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Where did you learn that tune?
I learned it from a recording of Dink Roberts, who's from a black banjo player from Haw River, North Carolina. Actually, black and native, I recently learned from my friend Justin Robinson, who, as y'all may know, is a banjo player and fiddle player, one of the original 3 Carolina chocolate drops. And he knows a lot more about the life stories of people from that part of the world than I do. And apparently Dink was Okanichi. So, Black Indian, as we say, and really wonderful banjo player, and apparently slide guitarist as well. Although I don't think there are any recordings of that, but people talk about it.
And what time was this recorded? What year?
Oh, he was recorded in the 70s or something.
Okay.
I mean, there were a few sets of recordings made. I think the earliest is in the 70s, but there's video of him. You can go online and watch him play. And very, very weird style, but very cool.
Yeah. Is there kind of any general, when you hear older recordings of black string bands versus a white string band of the same era, and is there kind of, and the same region, because it moves by region too, is there a difference in feel, or is there kind of an overarching difference that you can put into words?
Well, yes and no. So I think you cottoned on to the really important part that people often forget or don't talk about, which is that the regional variations are much stronger than any other types of variations, and of course time and place. So if you put Joe and Odell Thompson from Mebane, North Carolina, up against Tommy Jarrell, they're gonna sound a lot more alike than Joe and Odell Thompson versus like Cooge Bertram, who is from Fentress County, Tennessee. That's like a totally different style of music. So certainly the regional thing is more meaningful to me, to my ear.
Yeah.
I think there was probably an overarching difference, and this is where we run into an issue with the folkloric record as it has been passed down to us, that we know from oral history and from work that was done by black folklorists back in the day, that there was a whole separate body of tunes that these black string bands did not play for white audiences. And I think that will probably be more for the old folks than for people like Joe and Odell Thompson, who, of course, were also old folks, but less old. We know that like Murph Gribble, John Lusk, and Albert York had other tunes that they did not play for white audiences, and we don't know what they were. There are more recordings than we knew. There's a great website. I think it's just called like gribbleluskinyork.net or something. That has a lot of recordings from them, but this is part of the trouble that we wind up with, is that most of the folklorists were white. So a lot of that music never really got recorded.
Right.
And we know that even folks who didn't talk about having a whole separate repertoire, like Joe and Odell Thompson, for example, they didn't talk about having separate tunes, but they absolutely played them differently. And they talked about that. And I've talked to Justin about it, who saw it, happen in the house and saw it happen very differently than it did in other places. So there were differences, but I don't know that because of the time and the place that I'm from, I'm super well qualified to tell you what they were.
Yeah. It's sad you lose, you lose a part of a whole, tradition that on a certain portion of it.
Absolutely.
We do have a question from Bluesbone 007 saying, could Jake share differences between early black banjo players and then later clawhammer or similar styles?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things you could mean by early. So engage with that caveat. What I would say is that there's less of a difference than you might think. And that a lot of the inventions that we hear about clawhammer players doing in like the 60s, 70s, 80s are actually things that you can hear being done on older recordings from like the 40s and 50s. In particular, I think about like Richie Stearns or John Herman as clawhammer banjo players who have this like really deep groovy drop thumb style going on, where they're starting phrases with the thumbs sometimes. It's really syncopated. And I think most people are under the impression that that's like a 60s, 70s hippie invention. But if you go listen to like Nathan Frazier and Frank Patterson on recordings that were made in 1942, like Nathan Frazier is playing that same stuff. He's using his thumb the same way. Dink Roberts used his thumb to start phrases on the tune I just played for you. So there's a strong lineage there. I also contend that there's a really strong lineage with bluegrass, and I don't mean to wade into the creation myth of bluegrass because that's a whole other topic. But I mean, you listen to Murph Gribble, John Lusk, and Albert York, and it's a three-finger banjo player playing rolls that are like sometimes the same as the Scruggs rolls. You have a fiddle player who's trading off the melody with the other instruments. Like, it is an early bluegrass band.
Right.
Like, and it clearly is playing a thing that was fully formed well before Bill Monroe and his bluegrass boys showed up on the scene. So, I think that there's less of a difference than we often are told that there is, and that the more we listen to broad examples of black banjo playing and black fiddle playing, the more we will realize that there is precedent for a lot of the stuff we're doing today, and that many of those things, like the stuff that like Richie Stearns and John Herman were doing, the super syncopated drop thumbing and stuff that came in by way of like rock and roll and reggae, was a thing that had found its way out of the tradition into rock and roll and reggae and then crossed back in over time. There's this funny thing that you can see happening where some of the black performance practices or aesthetics were ironed out of the genre as it became commercialized, and then as white musicians became influenced by other black genres, they re-emerge on their own. And I find that really interesting. Like, there's a whole thing to be written about how that happened. But, yeah, that I would say that they're less different than you might think.
Right. What were who were some of your teachers? You learned from, I read Bruce Molsky some, and you also kind of, there's an Ithaca sound. You kind of do that as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't ever have consistent teachers on the banjo. I think fiddle requires a little bit more organized instruction. So I didn't have like one person that I went to.
Why would you say that? Why do you think so?
Because it's a lot less intuitive how to make noise with the fiddle. Like, a banjo, you sit down. I had like 3 lessons at the beginning from the professor who became my undergraduate advisor, Dr. Lydia Hammersley, on my Deering Good Time. And she taught me the basic like claw hammer motions, etc. And then I went and watched a ton of YouTube videos and was kind of off to the races. And I took, I think, like a handful of banjo workshops at camps and stuff that I think maybe opened some new doors. But for the most part, I feel like those early lessons set me up, and then it was just about listening really deeply. I think there are a lot of people who I would consider to be teachers who I've never spoken to in my life or never taken a lesson from, just because for years I went around with a big pair of headphones on like this, listening to old-time music all the time and paying really close attention to what everybody was doing. And I think in some ways that was more impactful than the few lessons that I had. I did take one workshop with Richie Stearns back in the day, who was a banjo player from Ithaca, played in the Horseflies, where he taught me a lot of the drop thumbing stuff that I was just talking about. So that happened. That is an important part of the story, but I also don't think that I wound up sounding like him. So it's a I don't know. It's been a journey in my own head a lot of the way.
Richie Stearns didn't play in the Red Hots, did he?
Yeah, he did, I think.
Okay, because that's funny. Because when I was listening to,
is that Riley Bogus was playing guitar in the Red Hots?
Okay, but there's something. There's in what tune is it? It is Rocky Road to Dublin. There's a groove in there. I was listening to that, and I'm like, it's not the same. The Red Hots kind of have a little bit almost a punk rock sort of
Oh
thing
yeah,
going on.
absolutely.
But there's a groove that was just, it's just on the background. And I'm like, this kind of has the same groove, like a groove that Whiteface does on the Red Hot's like
Yeah.
one recording. It's just where it's just like going. And I don't know why it reminded me, but that there is funny that there is a
Yeah.
linkage between one of your teachers and
Oh, totally. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head whether Richie was actually like the banjo player in that band, but actually, so I did my undergraduate thesis on the Ithaca sound, and what I learned is that back in the day when they like built I-81, there was like this pipeline of musicians from Ithaca down to Lexington, Virginia. And people traveled all along that. So a lot of folks of that age range from like the North Carolina and Virginia region hung out a lot with the people who were coming down from Ithaca. There was a lot of trade there, and that's why
Yeah.
you wind up with like David Winston having been in the Correct Tones up in Ithaca for an instant, or like Bruce Molsky.
Yeah.
People went back and forth a lot, and there are still a lot of really tight, wonderful friendships between folks who live in like the Round Peak region in Western Virginia, and folks who are up north in Ithaca.
Yeah, it's such a weird little. You just don't expect it. The the mid upstate New York thing connection down from Appalachia.
Yeah.
Um, and what drew you into what drew you? Because you mentioned you walked around with, headphones with old time music on. Like you really dove all the way in. Um, how old were you when this clicked for you and you like made the plunge and what was it like that turned you on?
So I started playing old time when I was 18. And what made me want to learn it was actually learning about the history of the banjo. I think I did it opposite to most people, where I think most people start learning the instrument and then find out about the history. But for me, it was the other way around. So I learned that, heard about the banjo being invented by enslaved African Americans, and wanted to kind of get close to something that my ancestors were doing that long ago. As black people, there aren't very many things we have handed down intact from that time period because, they weren't allowed to read and write and things like that. So any moment you get to interact on that personal of a level can be pretty special. So I went with that in mind, to learn banjo. Got my first banjo, had some okay times, and I think over like the next 2 years kind of got sucked into the community aspect of old time music and started to really, I knew people early on who were really deep in like the field recording thing, and I live in field recordings now. I love them. I don't listen to them recreationally, and they certainly weren't a very good like gateway drug to old time music. So for a long time, I was kind of learning old time as a way to learn the banjo so that I could do other stuff with the banjo. And then once I started to meet the community of old time music, really get in touch with the people who play it, and go to the festivals and stuff, that's when I was like, oh man, this is like where I want to hang out. I'm set.
And where were you geographically at this time?
I was living in upstate New York. I went to college like 2 hours east of Ithaca.
Okay.
So I went to school there, traveled to Ithaca all the time. By the end, almost every weekend, I was driving over to Ithaca. It was a really positive thing, to stumble on that in that moment of my life. I really needed it. And in many ways, that old time community was kind of the first community I feel I've really been a part of. So it's always special to me. I think will continue to be special to me.
Is that community there still really strong? That old time community in that area?
Yes, I think the old time scene, as with all scenes, has been really damaged by the pandemic. And I am still interested to see how and if it comes back to where it was, where, we're thankfully back to having most of our festivals and most of our camps and stuff, but people are scared the whole time they're there. And, I went to Clifftop this year, and it was the smallest one that anyone I talked to had ever seen. bar maybe
Really?
like the first couple. It's tough to see those changes, and you know, we all obviously were hoping that they would be shorter term than they have been, and some level of caution is still needed. But yeah, it is a bummer to feel those things shifting and changing. But I still see people all the time while I'm traveling. You know, I got into touring originally not because I wanted to be gigging all the time, but because I wanted to go hang out with all my old time friends who I only ever saw at festivals. And it was a way to like pay myself to travel. And I'm really glad that I did it. I'm glad that I'm still doing it and I still see those people. But things are different, and I hope that they come back to some vision of normalcy while I'm around to enjoy it.
Well, you've got a lot going on. I'm just looking at things from your website of things you're involved in. You have a duo as well, the Tui band. Is that pronounced right?
Yes, Tui. Yes.
Just want to mention, explain what that is quickly.
Yeah, so it's a duo that I have with a wonderful fiddler and violinist named Libby Whitenaur. Has been largely put on pause at the moment because I've been doing my solo stuff and Libby's been on tour with the Broadway production of Oklahoma. So we've been feeding our other musical pursuits for the past year and a half or so. But she's actually flying up here in January, so we can start workshopping some new stuff. So things are going well.
Cool. And then you're also on a couple sort of board members. You're a board member of Bluegrass Pride, and you're also a member. This might have been an annual, just a 1 year thing. A member of IBMA's Leadership Bluegrass class.
Yeah, that happens one year at a time. And I'm emeritus from Bluegrass Pride at this point. I have left the board because I was too busy to show up to do anything.
Right.
But they're still doing incredible work, and when things quiet down, I look forward to re-engaging. I love that organization and the people who are running things over there.
And then one other thing you listed, you were a Strathmore Artist in Residence. I'm not familiar with what that is.
It's Strathmore is one of the largest performing arts centers institutions around Washington D.C., where I grew
Okay.
up. So it's a notable thing regionally.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it was a great learning experience.
I could keep chatting on more and more, but we're kind of getting at the top of the hour. Is there anything else you want to cover right now?
I don't think so. We've covered
Yeah.
a lot of ground.
What are you working on in the future before we, what's I know you're pushing this record, but what's the next? Do you have another project bubbling in your head or anything like that?
Oh, totally. I submitted the pitch for the next record to Smithsonian just recently. So fingers crossed that they are excited about it. And I'm going to be just working on some other stuff. I've been hitting the road real hard lately, and have another fun set of shows coming up on like the East Coast and in the South in the next month or so. But it is a hard time to be a touring musician, as your Twitter feed will tell you. If you're on there and you're tuned in, everyone's having a really hard time making it work, and I am no exception to that. So I am looking forward to finding some time off the road, finding some ways to continue to make music and to be seen without traveling all of the time, although I'm still going to be traveling a lot of the time. So I'm building out the studio, getting ready to indulge some musical ideas that I've been having for about a year now and not had time to pursue. So I think it's going to be a productive time coming up.
You ever do any production? I mean, you seem like you would be a great person to help in, an artist focus, a lot of loose ideas.
I would love to produce the right person. I think that would be really, really cool. Yeah. So I have not done it yet, but I remain hopeful that one day someone will ask me.
Right. We have a comment from Jamie Phillip saying, "Wow, Jake, you are my hero. I love your music and your knowledge of the music. Thank you for enlightening information about the history of the early recording business."
Thanks, Jamie. That's very kind of you. Aw.
Well, I think that's a good spot to kind of leave it right there. Thanks everybody for showing up again. This has been a lot of fun, Jake. Thanks for hanging out. Hopefully we can meet in person sometime.
Absolutely. Yes.
And probably we'll run into each other at a festival or something, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, it'll happen.
But would you like to play us out with a tune?
Happy to. I will play another one from Spider Tales.
Okay.
I've been enjoying reuniting with that repertoire. This is going to be another one from Judy Hyman. It's called Beyond This Wall. Thanks for having me. Thanks for watching, y'all.